In this example, I will migrate an AWS EC2 instance. So I will migrate the AWS to Azure EC2 instance that is running on my AWS onto my Azure environment using a virtual machine running on VMware Workstation. So this will be my assessment virtual machine where I will run the assessment and then migrate from AWS to Azure. So to start things off, if I go to Azure, I already have a virtual network created and a resource group created. This I have also shown in my previous migration video. To migrate, let's click on Azure Migrate. Click on Servers, Databases, and Web Apps. And over here, if you don't have a project, you would create a new project. I will put it in the same resource group as my migration and name the project AWS Migration and select UAE. Click on Create. Once your project is created, you will have two tools over here. One is the assessment tool and one is the migration tool. Now, the assessment tool will assess your EC2 instances on your AWS environment and will give you an assessment of the EC2 instances that are running on your AWS network. You can skip the assessment tool and go directly into migration tools by clicking on Discover. But what I will do is I will go through the assessment as well as the migration tools. I will divide this AWS migration course into two sections. The first section would be the assessment tools, which would be similar to the migration of a VMware environment where you would assess your VMware environment. In this case, I will assess my AWS environment. And then we will move on in the next video to migrating the EC2 instance. So let's click on Discover. And the type of virtualization, instead of selecting VMware vSphere hypervisor, in this example, we will select physical or other, which has the AWS option. Now let's generate a project key. So I will just say AWS key and click on generate. While this generates, what you can do is you can download the Azure appliance and copy it onto the virtual machine that you are going to use to assess your migration. So now I've already downloaded my appliance and I have copied it onto my Windows Server 2019. And I have also extracted it over here. To start the assessment, let's go to Windows PowerShell and ISE and run it as an administrator. And we will open one of the scripts over here, which is the Azure Migrate installer. So if you remember in my previous video, I had an OVA file and that OVA file already had the Azure Migrate installer installed. But since I do not have one installed and I need to use it to migrate my AWS EC2 instance, I will need to first run the PowerShell script Azure Migrate installer. So if you click on Open and navigate to the script and click on the play button, which will run the script. And over here, we would select option number 3, which is physical or AWS. Click on enter. I'm on the Azure public environment. So click 1, click on enter. Set up for public connectivity, select 1 again. You have chosen to set up an appliance to discover and assess the servers running as physical or AWS to an Azure Migrate with default public endpoint connectivity. Click yes to confirm. Select yes, click enter, let it run through the process, and let me maximize this for the time being. It's enabling the IIS role. So once it runs through the installation, you will get a prompt to install the latest Edge browser. I have the latest Chrome, so what I'll go ahead and do is I'll click on No. It's skipping the Edge browser installation. Do you want to remove Internet Explorer from your machine? I do not want to uninstall, so I'll click No again. Please review the 2 warnings. I believe that is the warning 1 is to install the Edge, and warning 2 is to remove the Internet Explorer as a default browser. So I'll ignore both those warnings, and now my appliance should be on my desktop. Let's go ahead and open this in Google Chrome. Since Google Chrome is my default browser, if I double click it, it opens up in Google Chrome. And now we will follow the similar steps that we did when we were migrating VMware Virtual Machine to Azure. Click on I agree for terms of use. Check the connectivity is fine, time sync is fine. Now we have to use the Azure migrate key. So let's go back into Discover and copy the project key and paste it over here. Click on verify. It's running the prerequisites. This could take around 5 minutes. So I will pause this video and come back to you once it is completed. So prerequisites have been run. Now let's log in, copy and paste this. Let's log into my Azure account. So I have successfully logged in and it's initiating the appliance registration. This could take up to 10 minutes. So once again, I will pause this video and come back to you once it is completed. Now the appliance has been successfully registered. If we click on view details, cloud is public. The scenario is AWS. Our subscription is pay as you go. And the appliance name is AWS key, which is our project key, and the migrate project is AWS migrate. So we can close this. Now click on add credentials. I will add the credentials of my machine that is running on AWS. So what I will do is I will just say AWS migrate. Username is administrator and I will give it my password. Click on save. And now I will start the discovery. Since this is a single source, I'll say add single item. My discovery source is a Windows server. For the IP address, I will put the public IP address of my AWS server. So the public IP address is 54.166.58.168.252. And let's map my AWS migrate credentials. Click on save. It's validating. So the validation has failed. I believe this port has to be open for inbound connections. So if I click on validation failed. Okay, so let's go back into AWS migrate. Let's see if we have a firewall running here. So if we go to control panel, click on firewall and let's turn this one off just till we migrate. And we shall also allow 5985 on inbound port. So if I go to my EC2 instance, if I go into my security groups, and I just need to see which security group is for this instance. It is this group. So if I edit the inbound rules, let's add a rule, custom TCP rule. Let's add the port 5985, and let's say anywhere. Let's save this rule. So now my rule has been saved, and now let's try again. So if I revalidate, my validation is now successful. Let's disable this slider because I don't have any additional features like databases and SQL Server instances, and click on Start Discovery. So the process is similar to the VMware. The only difference is that we had to run the PowerShell script. We did the assessment. We connected to our AWS server with the public IP address. Initially, it failed because there was a firewall and there was no incoming allowed ports. So I disabled the firewall and I added the port and I started the discovery. So I'll pause this video and go back into my Azure portal and continue this video once my EC2 instance has been discovered. One thing to note, that the appliance machine that I'm using, which is my Windows Server 2019, has to have a minimum of 16 GB memory, 8 vCPUs, and 80 gigs of disk storage. This is one of the prerequisites which you would need to use to run the Azure Migrate appliance. So the software that I downloaded, which is over here, this machine has these specifications. So if you are planning to migrate, you would need a machine that is of this specification. So on my Azure Migrate dashboard, I can see that I have one appliance, which is my Windows Server 2019 server, and the discovery of my AWS EC2 instance is in progress. So I'll just wait for this to complete and click on refresh. My EC2 instance has been discovered on Azure, and it's saying start assessing your servers by clicking on assess. So let's click on the discovered servers, and over here you will see my EC2 instance. Let's click on assessment. The assessment type is an Azure VM, and it is discovered from the Azure Migrate appliance. Let's edit the settings for the time being over here, and let's say that it is in UAE North, and I just don't want any saving options at the moment. VM series, I'll select any type, which is fine for the time being, and click on save. Click on select servers to assess, and over here I'll select my EC2 instance. I'll create a new group name along with an assessment name. So AWS assessment. I'll copy this same thing over here and click on create assessment. The assessment is being computed and it will take a few minutes to be ready to use. Click on refresh, and this count should change to 1 in a minute. Okay, so my count has been changed to 1. So if we click on the assessment, over here it creates an assessment, and it will tell you that this machine is ready for Azure. So if you have 10 machines, it will tell you how many are ready for Azure and how many are ready with conditions, how many are not ready, and so on. It also gives you a monthly cost breakdown for compute services and storage services, and monthly cost estimate for your different types of storage, whether it's an HDD, SSD, and so on. Basically, this is just an assessment. So once you start your discovery, you create an assessment, And now the next step would be to migrate the machine.